Free spells! Don't you just love them? Between your griefs and your fierce guardianships, a lot of people have become disenfranchised with the idea of free spells in Magic. But moving away from those overpowered, boring staples, what if I told you that Wizards actually perfected the art of the free spell a quarter century ago, and in one of the notoriously worst blocks in the game's history? Ensnare is a 4-mana blue instant that taps all creatures you control and can be cast by bouncing 2 islands you control rather than paying its mana cost. That's right, turns out Nemesis did actually get some things correct. This card is wild. Tapping all creatures on the board at instant speed for no mana cost feels like a goddamn custom card. And yet, here it is. It's incredible in any number of situations. Personally, my favourite is to use this as a game ender, and not just in the way you think. One of my most solidly held EDH opinions is that mass tap is horrendously undervalued. I talked about it when I covered Githzerai Monk, and I'll say it again now. Sure, it doesn't fully remove any creatures from the board, but when the creature's controller is removed from the game because they couldn't block, does that really matter? And that philosophy applies here, because if you cast this thing on the end step before your turn, ready in time for all your board to untap just nicely and swing out at your choice of nigh defenseless opponents, that's pretty much just the game right there. Beautiful, simple, and oh so sweet, especially when it comes out of nowhere from the guy who's tapped out in the corner. But also, because it taps all creatures, you can use it for some fun, tricksy shenanigans, with suddenly disabling blocks on your opponent's turn. Turns out, casting this just after an opponent declares attacks is a great way to get an out-of-nowhere elimination from the game, especially if, once again, it's coming from the player with no mana open. And hey, this even makes a good protection spell in a pinch. Tapped out and open to attack from all angles? Simply play this bad boy to tap all the opponent's creatures at the end of main, and ensure that you aren't going to end up as pavement paste in the next 5 minutes. And once again, no mana cost. Bellissimo. But just because there's no mana cost doesn't mean there's no cost. And bouncing 2 islands seems like a pretty steep one at that, which, to be fair, it is. That being said, if you're going to be ending the game on your next turn, the cost doesn't exactly matter now, does it? And even beyond that situation, while yes, it is quite the steep downside, you can be sure as hell you can abuse the living daylights out of it. The obvious upside here is retriggering your landfall. So it fits perfectly into, say, Tatiova, Patron of the Moon, Dakon, that kind of ilk. There is also one other card that fits uncomfortably well with this one. A certain land, which definitely should not have been an island, but the designers of Throne of Eldraine were in a collective psychosis. So here we are, Mystic Sanctuary. Yup, this thing loops with Sanctuary, as you can bounce the Sanctuary back to hand with Ensnare's cost, and then play it as your next land drop, stacking the Ensnare, which is now in the grave, to the top of your library, ready to draw and cast once again next turn. Truly and wonderfully heinous. And so yeah, that's Ensnare. One of a surprising number of actually really well-designed cards from the garbage fire that is the Masques block small set. And real talk, just to get on my soapbox for a minute, this is how you do free spells. Make the cost actually mean something. Sure, this thing's cost means it's loopable with Mystic Sanctuary, but it is still a steep cost, which requires forethought to use, deck building concessions, and heavily encourages that it's primarily used in 1 or 2 colour decks, with the specific island requirement at least nominally making it more awkward to use in higher colour count mana bases. That's certainly a darn sight more interesting and engaging to me than just control your commander, or pitch this card. As for where to play this thing, frankly, any blue creature deck, especially mono blue, as they're usually gasping for good finishes. Alternatively, just Patron of the Moon, as I previously mentioned. That card makes this thing completely unreasonable, especially with Mystic Sanctuary. So yeah, Ensnare is wonderful. Play it if you aren't already. Ciao.